Hello, this is Tim Sedlak from Micro Focus. I'm the Director of Product Management and Identity and Access Management. And with me today, I have Charles Davis, who's VP of Engineering for Policy Products. And today we'd like to talk to the SUSE audience about Active Directory Bridge or AD Bridge and how we use that to benefit SUSE customers to extend security policies and access controls. So thanks for paying attention to us today at SUSECON Digital. Let's jump right in. Let's talk a minute about Active Directory. And I know for the SUSE audience, this isn't a normal thing, but Active Directory has some controls in it that give you configuration, security, user account controls that have long benefited Windows customers. It's provided this security, perimeter, and sphere of control. But we know that the Windows population has dwindled, and SUSE has really grown at a great rate. And what we've done with Active Directory Bridge is allow you to take that sphere of control and security perimeter and extend it to those SUSE boxes with group policy and some account controls. But that's not the end of our story. I think what we want to say that we hear from customers and what we recognize is that customers have really made this move to cloud, and SUSE is a great choice for them. But you're set to manage those differently, separately, and it's a challenge. What if you could take that control you have to wrap your security perimeter around the cloud, regardless of whether it's in Amazon, AWS, Google, private cloud, wherever. And you could have that sphere of control, and then you could wrap a policy around it. And I'll get into what this means when we talk about policy. We've got a good demonstration for you, but this is a way you can get tighter control over your environment. Let's talk about what people do today without AD Bridge. On the Active Directory side, on the Windows side, on-premise, they've got these identity services and this thing called group policy that is a control that both sets and enforces security and configuration policy. And on the Linux side, on the SUSE side, you've got people running Chef and Puppet. They're using some local accounts. They might be doing some configuration management, even with SUSE Manager. But in talking to people, you know, this established process and procedure on the Windows tends to mean that on the Linux side, there's a little bit of less structure. And that can lead to some challenges. And I know as we talk to people in the development of our process and product here around AD Bridge, some of the things we hear are what you see here: misconfiguration. I know I've seen plenty of breaches where that comes into it. We have siloed accounts, a large number of increased workloads as you try to do things differently on one set of boxes versus the other. You've got different run books depending on where the server lives, how you want to treat it, those sorts of things. Charles, what do you hear from people is kind of their key customer challenge? What to you stands out in this list?
Well, from my point of view and from what I've heard, and we've all read the stories and heard the horrible things that can happen, but it's really misconfiguration and configuration drift kind of combined. And what I mean by that is most SUSEManager deployments, most Linux deployments, people roll out these new deployments and they've got, you know, a good base image, or they've got a good policy in place for bringing those machines up. But what happens is over time, you have administrators logging on, or even bad actors getting on the machines and making configuration changes. Let's talk about the case for changes that an administrator makes. We've all seen that. We've all had to make changes on the machine while we're doing our work, and you don't put something back quite right by the time you're done, and that machine's left with configuration drift. It's outside of the compliance of what was originally meant to be in place. And this happens all the time. And it's it can be a simple mistake, or it can be something that like I said, can be somebody doing something malicious. So those are the types of things that lead to some of these really massive data breaches or security events that we've heard so much about.
Right. Very good point. So with an AD bridge in place, you can take those identity services, and there we're talking about standard authentication, authorization pieces. You can manage those users from Active Directory and get all the structure you get there. But probably the more interesting thing for our SUSE audience is group policy, something the Windows guys have had for a little while. And policy is probably something you're familiar with if you've heard about VMware, MDM, even SUSE Manager, you can set some policies in. But there are some benefits around group policy, around persistence and capabilities that can be out beyond the on-premise case of where I'm running SUSE. So one of the things that we wanted to say is that AD Bridge and SUSE Manager are actually very complementary and help solve real world problems for our SUSE customers. AD Bridge offers you a solution where you can have AD act as the IDP so that you can manage those users, exclude you from using those local accounts. But some of the benefits here is, like I said, crossing those cloud boundaries. And most importantly here is probably the bottom piece. That's really setting the policies, monitoring the policies, and resetting a policy if that drift that Charles talked about happens. So let's talk a little bit more about how that can help you fight off some bad guys. So for instance, imagine you've got your SUSE Manager here, and that's going to roll out some gold images for you. With AD Bridge, you can identify some services, OS settings, custom application settings through a config file, and you can roll that out across your cloud, across on-premise, and that's absolutely fine. But let's say you get a bad actor that is able to log into your Azure machine running SUSE. So your SLES box on a VM out in Azure, this guy's in that your app is set. What happens with AD Bridge in place is we'll alert you, and then we'll roll that configuration back onto the machine and reset it. So your bad actor had access for all of 60 seconds, let's say, in worst case scenario, 60 seconds. But AD Bridge can help you fight those bad guys. Now, we like to talk about AD Bridge in an end-to-end security and compliance fashion. And for us, it's kind of a process of set your policies, very SUSE Linux focused, and then assign them appropriately using that structured AD structure. And Charles will give us a good example of what that looks like. Roll out those policies, turn on the enforcement, and when those bad guys comes in, you get an alert, and we'll feed that data out to any SIEM. I know we've got ArcSight and Splunk on this box here, but those events will show up wherever you want them to. We'll feed them out from our syslog provider out to whichever SIEM your SUSE customers are using. This gives you a level of control and centralized management that you previously didn't have. But more importantly, it makes it easier to prove that you're compliant, not just with internal policies, but external regulations as well. We do provide not just the native interfaces that Windows guys are used to through the native tools, group policy management editor, Active Directory users and computers. We also have a web console to manage the same policy. The key that example of Linux, and again, regardless where it runs on-prem or anywhere in the cloud, you can control your firewall, you can manage your services when they need to be stopped or started or restarted. The config file piece, I know Charles is going to take us through a demo here, because as much as I could say about managing config files, seeing a demo of it is much more powerful and much easier to understand. But we've got a real robust way to manage those configuration files and deploy those files, so that if you have a desired state for a custom application, if you have a particular setting that you want to enforce somewhere, whether in a portion of a configuration file or the entire configuration file, or even a set of configuration files, we can help you. And here's a screenshot of that web console that I talked about. So in this release of AD Bridge, we extended all the things we did for on-premise out to the cloud, so that Linux natively joins Active Directory. And what that means is we're not replicating users to a local database. We're not requiring you to use a VPN or any compromising technology like that. It's simplified compliance. It's unique value that's just from Micro Focus. We're the only one that can do the multi-cloud environment and the policy style of management that I talked about previously. Now, some of the things we've heard from the Linux administrator side of the house is, hey, I've got native tools, I'm using some scripting. There are some challenges with that. We're not saying that those are a bad thing, but it would be nice not to have to set up a VPN or do the manual process to manage servers so that scalability isn't a problem. Or on the scripting side, where you're not integrated with AD, so anything that's user oriented in there, you're not using that centralized IDP. So we know that there are particular challenges with scripting. Even if you're using a chef and a puppet, if you lose somebody that writes that script, then somebody's going to have to tease apart what they do and how they do it. So we're helping you avoid some of these loopholes and just generally making the life of a Linux administrator easier. We're not trying to take any of the control out of the hands of Linux administrators. We're trying to make their lives easier. Anything you'd add here, Charles, that I glossed over or skipped?
Well, there's definitely, we all know the challenges of maintaining scripts and maintaining a bunch of machines, whether they're running in the cloud or on-prem, across numerous SLES administrators. And the native tools, I'm sure most of you have probably had to deal with the challenges of trying to use native tools and how that really only gives you very limited identity provider access to be able to use AD as an IDP. But what we looked at was, these are great tools. We just wanted to improve upon them and improve upon them greatly, and then also, like Tim said, bring that out to the cloud. And one of the things that I would add, and I'll show some of this in the demo, is unlike most IDPs, like Tim mentioned, you don't have to replicate your users, and I'll show you how that works. So there's no delay when you add a user into Active Directory. But also, because we're not requiring a VPN, everything we're doing is done in a highly secure way, encrypted with structured API calls, which gives us an additional layer of security on top of what you would expect to deal with if you were managing using just native tools And I'll show you some of the cool stuff we do that'll play nice with the scripting and maybe remove the need for some of those scripts to be able to go out and check and make sure that your policies are in place and your configuration files are the same, or haven't changed, things like that.
Oh, that's great.
But
that's
yeah,
great.
I can actually jump into a demo and show some of that in action.
All right. Well, so this is kind of my marketing oriented slide of what things we're doing. Simple centralization for authentication authorization, improve that user management, maintain consistency. So at this point, I think the best thing would be for you to give us a demo of some of the things we've talked about here, Charles.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen here. And Tim, can you see my screen?
I can.
Excellent. So we talked about the IDP piece, the using Active Directory as your identity provider of record, and that's pretty common. We've talked about it quite a bit. With some solutions, it's a bit of a challenge because you have to replicate users, and we talked about how we don't do that, not even for the cloud-based user or cloud-based SLES instances. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'll run through my OU structure, and you can see here I've set up my Active Directory, and I've got my Linux machines, and I've got my Linux machines in AWS, Linux machines in Azure, Google, and my on-site Linux machines. And the reason I'm showing you this is we're going to be working with this quite a bit, and you'll notice that I have my OU structure over here for my GPOs, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what I'm going to do is I've got in Azure, I've got a SLES machine running there, and I've got my on-prem SLES machine running right here. So I'm just going to go and add a user real quick. So create a new user. And we'll make this SUSECON at adb.local. And I'm going to set a password. Next. Finish. And now what I'm going to do is, because we honor the AD user group structure, in order for that user to be able to log on, I've got to go put it in my microfocus policy admins group. And let me add. There it is. So I've added that, and I'm going to apply that change. And okay, and I'm just going to minimize this for a moment. And so I've got that SUSECON account, and we said we were going to look at Azure, so that's the ASU, and there's ASU-15-1. So let me replicate that session. Log on with the SUSECON account.
And this isn't a local user. This is the actual Active Directory user, and the authentication is happening back on-prem on the Active Directory. Is that right?
That's correct. And I'm going to show you how that works the exact same way on the local, so the on-prem SLES instance as well. And so what's happening is, without replicating those users at all, I'm logging. I just created that user, no delay, within Active Directory, and now those users have the ability to log on to those Linux machines. And the same goes for removing that user. So you can see I'm there, and let's go check here, and you can see, yep, logged on to my SLES machine in the cloud with my user there, and on-prem as well. And you can see that I've got my users' ability to log on. So if I need to add an account for someone to log on to one of those machines, do some maintenance, then remove that account, I can do that really easy by managing all of my users in one location for both my on-prem and my cloud-based SLES instances.
And you never have to wait for that user to be copied to some other database or replicated locally to the agent or anything like that.
Correct. Because
That's
we are passing that authentication request down to the on-prem domain controller. So the domain controller issues us the curb token and handles the challenge response for us. And that's all done in a highly secure, encrypted, structured API call.
And I'll add, it's also audited. So, you know, we've got all the activity captured through the Active Directory auditing that's happening as well.
Exactly. Centralized auditing of who's doing what where.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, that's interesting from an authorization and authentication perspective. And I see a lot of value there, but I know what we can do with policy. And is there something you can show me in regards to policy?
Of course, absolutely. That's where it really starts to get kind of fun and interesting. So if you've looked at AD bridging products, authentication against on-prem domain controller, cool. Doing it in the cloud, unique to us. But now we're going to show you some of the other stuff that we do that's really cool. So what we allow you to do is, I showed you that structure with my machines that are in the cloud and on-prem. And here's my GPO structure that I have. So my OUs, I've got my Linux machines, cloud-based, AWS, Azure, Google, and then my on-site. And you can see I've got my GPOs created for these machines based on where they reside. And since we honor the OU structure, we'll go back up into the OU structure and continue to add those GPOs as they apply. So as you can see, I'm working in AWS right now, and when my AWS machines come online, they'll immediately get configured, pull down these GPOs, configure the machine, and get these GPOs as well to be able to create a baseline for application management or critical applications that I need to lock down the config files. So I'll show you some of the settings that we support, but I really want to show you the locking down the config files and being able to show you how we honor and enforce a desired state. So real quick, on the machine where I work with my GPOs, you can see I've got a Linux settings here, and this allows me to start building out my GPOs. So we do things like firewall settings. You can do firewall settings at the service level or at the for allow deny, or you can do a custom rule where you can start writing really granular rules at the IP tables level. Services, I'll talk about this in a minute, but this allows me to, within a GPO, be able to make sure a service is started, stopped, or restarted on a regular basis. And I'll explain to you why that's important in a moment. Configuration files. So you can see out of the box, we allow you to manage SSH and sudoers. With configuration files, this is a section of a config file. It's not the entire configuration file, but specific settings within it. And we will allow you to create those settings and then manage only those settings within the config file. So you think, okay, SSH and sudoers, that's great, but what if I have other files that I want to persist or manage sections in? And here you can add a custom configuration file, and that'll allow you to define any file on the machine and set the settings that you want to manage within that config file. So even if it's a custom application that we at Micro Focus don't know anything about, that's okay. We give you the ability to create the GPOs to manage those settings within that config file. And the same holds true for entire configuration files. So not just a grouping of settings, but if you want the whole entire configuration file to persist, let's say something like your SSH configuration, you might not want that changing. So you can persist the entire thing. And I'll get back to this in a moment, but you can see we allow you to execute commands. So if you have, let's say you have a machine that comes online and the first thing you need to do is run the playbook for being able to bring it into CIS or some other regulation. And so you've got a set of scripts that you want to run. Well, this is where we start to say that, you know, we want to play nice with the chef and puppet administrators and allow you to manage your scripts. You can create a GPO so that those scripts will get run immediately when that machine comes online. The GPO will get pulled down. That allow you to run that script. And you just define the script and the location that you want to run. And when the GPO downloads, it'll run it. And you can also see that when I do that, I can say either run this once or run it every time that every cycle that the GPOs get checked. And then you get to manage your AD logins. And this is really at the machine level if you want to get more granular in managing the logons for your machines beyond what's in the AD user group structure. But what I want to get back to is the configuration file and the persistence and monitoring and notifications. So if I go here, you can see I've got a GPO that's a deploy files GPO. And what that is a custom cloud app config file. And let me show you what that looks like. So here I've got a custom cloud app config file. This is my gold standard. This is my desired state for my custom app that needs to be running at all times. I can't have anybody going in and changing that outside of the processes that are defined, because my business depends on it. And it's a custom app, so we at Micro Focus don't need to know anything about it. So you can see you can define the config file as it's supposed to be for your application. In this case, I made it real simple. Configuration file gold image, secure this app, yes. Is it in the cloud? Yes. Now, if this was something like SSH and it's a config file that gets loaded into memory when the service gets started, that's where you would couple this GPO with a services restart GPO setting as well. So that way, if something changes, not only does the config file get put back in place, but the service gets restarted as well. So you can see I've got my custom cloud app config file going to my root test directory. So let's go take a look at that real quick. And we said that one was running in AWS. So let's see, that's my AWS SLES machine. And you can see I'm in the root test directory, and there's my custom cloud app config file. So I'm going to show you over here. This is my log file tailing from this machine for the AD Bridge agent. We also have a syslog provider that you can use if you want to use it for pushing events to your SIEM system or to a monitoring for application monitoring or an operations team. But let me show you how that works real quick. So you can see I'm going to cat that custom config file to show you, and yep, there you can see that's the exact same config file I showed you that I had in the GPO. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that custom app config file. And you can tell that I'm logged on as root, and normally I'd be able to go in and do whatever I want. So I'm just going to go down, and let's say it's a bad actor hacking this machine, and he's gotten into my custom application and exploited my config file. So I'm going to save that, yes, and let's cat it again so you can see, and you can see I've exploited this configuration file. But what you also see over here is, if you notice, the file watcher event was just triggered. Well, what does that mean? That means that we're pointing out that and creating an event for your SIM system or your operations monitoring team to be able to see that at a granular level, something on this machine that is not supposed to be changed has been changed. And we show you it's the custom app config. Okay, so now my security team and my operations team know that someone's gone in and made a change to my custom application that is critical to my business. And what we're actually doing here is we're reaching out to the domain controller for this machine and checking to see if there are any additional updated GPOs. We're going to get all of the GPOs for this machine, and we're going to reapply all of them within a minute. What does that mean? That means we're going to put this machine back to its desired state. So if a bad actor is trying to get on this machine and make changes, we're continually gonna roll those changes back and alert the operations or security team. So you see it rolled through and reapplied all of my GPOs to that machine, putting it back in its desired state. And let's go cat that config file again. And you can see that config file has been rolled back to its desired state, to my gold image. And if this was a application that had a service running with it, like I said, that service would be restarted as well. And that threat actor who's making changes to my machine has now been identified via notifications. The changes they've made have been rolled back, and I can make a decision with my security team. Is this something that I need to have SUSE Manager completely redeploy this machine? Do I need to wall it off, put it in a honeypot, and track this user and watch and try to gather some forensics analysis so that I can identify what type of threat actor this is? Or is this just a mistake and everything's okay? I can leave this machine online, everything's been put back the way it is, and I can go find out who it was that logged on and made the changes outside of the normal processes.
Wow, that's really powerful, Charles. Thanks for showing us that. And I know your configuration file is really simple here, and you could have set up multiple policies depending on whether this is cloud-based, SUSE Linux, or on-prem, or you can even get specific and say, just for the AWS machines, here's what I want to do with SUSE Linux, and any new boxes that are brought up in AWS get those policies automatically, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what you see here. Is I've got within AWS, for AWS specifically, I have certain configurations that I require for my AWS machines, and so I structured my OUs such that I can create my GPOs, and those will only apply to that folder because it's a down low-level child folder. If you go up one for all of my cloud Linux, that applies to all of my cloud Linux machines and gets stacked along with my AWS. And then I also have, for all of my Linux machines, no matter where they reside, I also have configurations for all of those, like my firewall configuration.
Wow, that's really beneficial and gives you much tighter control over security and configuration. I'm going to switch back here. Thanks for your demo, Charles. I think it was a great way to show us the very simple authentication authorization and how we can use AD Bridge to also not lock down the security and configuration of services, OS settings, custom applications even, but we can maintain that and be part of your security chain to identify, when you have bad actors, when you have somebody that makes a mistake in configuration, and you can provide some guidance to those people. So, the combination of Micro Focus AD Bridge and SUSE Linux becomes a real powerful tool for those customers that are familiar with Active Directory, are using group policy, and we know that's a very large portion of enterprise customers worldwide. So there's a real opportunity here to make their lives easier, make them more secure, and ultimately, bring more value to SUSE Linux from a security and configuration perspective. Charles, thanks for your time today. I think the demo was great. If you have any questions, reach back out to us at Micro Focus. This is again Tim Sedlak, Director of Product Management, and I had with me today Charles Davis, VP of Engineering. Thanks, everyone.